Welcome, everybody, to the Always Hope podcast, where we explore solutions to a better life anchored in faith and science. I'm your host, Dr. Mario Sacasa, and thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. Are you experiencing loneliness and not quite sure what to do about it? If so, then this episode will be of great benefit to you, because today I welcome Regina Boyd, licensed marriage and family therapist and author of the new book, Leaving Loneliness Behind: 5 Keys to Experiencing God's Love and Building Healthy Connection with Others. In this episode, we have an in-depth conversation exploring themes of loneliness, the importance of connection, and strategies for developing healthier relationships. We also cover a range of topics from setting healthy boundaries to understanding the impact of past experiences on current behavior. Regina also shares insights into her new book, along with practical advice for fostering meaningful connection in today's society. Well, you have thoughts about today's episode? Please leave a rating, write a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Every single one of those absolutely help the show. Well, let's get into this conversation with Regina Boyd. Regina Boyd, welcome to the Always Hope podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is a gift. It is a gift to have you. So thank you so much for carving time out of your busy schedule to join me and my listeners to be able to share about your new book, Leaving Loneliness Behind: 5 Keys to Experiencing God's Love and Building Healthy Connections with Others. The book was great. Thanks so much for allowing your publisher to send me a copy so I can be able to read it. Okay, so let's begin by reviewing loneliness, all right? And I know you quote this at the very beginning of the book, but the last year, I think it was April of 2023, the Surgeon General issued this warning. And the Surgeon General, who's really kind of the chief doctor of the United States and really the spokesperson of things related to public health, the Surgeon General issued this statement that was really kind of surprising. I think we had not really thought of this epidemic of loneliness before, and really thinking through like what is the impact that loneliness is having on people. And I think we've kind of maybe have heard like, oh, social media is kind of affecting things, or kids are spending too much time online, or, you know, little bits or pieces here and there. But it was really surprising for me as a therapist to see, oh my goodness, here's a, you know, the medical community recognizing that like this is a serious issue, and we need to spend some real time and resources and energy kind of really thinking this through. I heard him talk on another podcast, the Rich Roll podcast. I'm not sure if you listened to that one. It's a good show. And on it, like the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, I think if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Mm-hmm. He was very open on the podcast and shared about his own experiences of loneliness, especially as a teen, and kind of the impact that had on him, which was really beautiful, kind of hearing him share about this. And so recognizing that this was something that was coming out of his own heart. And so here's just some quotes I'm going to give from the document itself that was issued last year. The Department of Health and Human Services website says this. It says, the physical health consequences of poor or insufficient connection include a 29% increased risk of heart disease, a 32% increased risk of stroke, and a 50% increased risk of developing dementia for older adults. Additionally, lacking social connection increases risk of premature death by more than 60%. Staggering.
Yeah.
Staggering. And they go on to talk about the mental health challenges, of course, that's associated with it. But just even listening to these health statistics, what are your thoughts? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, as I was preparing for the book and doing the research, I mean, it really is shocking to think about the health implications, because oftentimes, especially when it comes to mental health or therapy in general, people don't think of it as something that impacts their physical health. Mm-hmm. I think as therapists, we've known this for a long time, and we've seen the overlap and the correlation. I don't know about you, but I've had many a person that I've worked with come into me and say, I've been to this doctor, I've been through all this testing, nobody can figure out why my blood pressure is this high, or why I'm testing high in these, I have so much inflammation, you know. And for us, it seems very obvious. Well, that's because you have have this history of trauma, or you have these problems in your relationships, right? And so it just makes sense that chronic loneliness would have this type of impact, because our social foundations are fundamental. We need them for existence. We need them to survive. And I kind of put them on the same level as basic human needs: food, shelter, clothing, and I want to put healthy relationships as number 4 right after that. We just really can't live without it.
We can't, no. And I think all the evolutionary science points to that as well, in this need that we are wired for being able for connection, and we're wired for intimacy and relationships. And that's because we all recognize our vulnerability being alone. I mean, the reality is that we're not, as far as animals go, and I mean, we don't have big talons, as humans. We don't have big horns to be able to go fight off something. We don't have, a cheetah-like speed and reflexes. And so our superpower is our strength in numbers in our community, and being able to develop those relationships, and recognizing that if somebody's got a piece that I'm lacking, then that's a win-win for both of us. If I'm sharing my goods and you're sharing your goods, then we have a capacity to be able to create something better. And again, I just want to make the caveat. Obviously, we have a lot more in terms of that. Obviously, I'm not saying we're just animals. I want to be clear theologically, that like we obviously have an eternal soul, and we're creating the image and likeness of God. Let me just get all my definitions correct before people, misconstrue me in some way. But it is, we do live in an age where the foundations, or how would we say, the givens for connection no longer exist.
Yes.
And those givens are what I think has created, this. And he doesn't really get into kind of the reasons for it. He speculates, and he makes kind of broad statements in terms of like what we need is we need to create more environments where connection is more friendly or more capable, without getting into the weeds of what really that looks like. And I think that's my one limitation, I would say, is a serious limitation in the document, or the warning that he kind of gives is, well, why not talk more openly? And he does a little bit. He gives a little bit of kind of reference to the fact that we just don't have religious houses of worships that we all get together with on Sundays. Like, this is what used to be. It used to be every Sunday, as a parish, our local community or our congregation, we would get together, and we would always be around people. At least we'd have once a week where we know we would have that. Maybe Wednesday night Bible study or something else, where we had touch points where everybody in the community was getting together. We had families, and we had stable marriages where the stability is what provided safety and security for children to be raised in. We didn't travel as much as we do now. We weren't as transient as we are. So we were raised in environments where our grandparents were close by, or aunts and uncles or cousins, or friendships were formed very locally. And we're in a radical shift that's happening in our society, where some of those things, the digital advances, of course, allow certain things to happen, like us right now. You're in Florida, I'm in Charlotte. We can have this great conversation. I got listeners all over the place who will be chiming in. So we're grateful for technology to allow us to be able to have these moments of connection to some degree. But we also are paying a price through this transient society that we live in. And so I think it's kind of both this transient digital society, which we can navigate, but then also this increase in secularism, which has pulled us away from those touch points, those bedrocks of connection, those bedrocks of community. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that secular point is really, really interesting. And in general, I think we're a lot busier also. We just, because of the technology, we have so much available to us that fills our time, and we've sort of lost the ability to just hang out. I think about, an old town square where people were kind of hustling and bustling, running into each other on their way to the market. And I think with a lot of suburban life, right, that's a lot more challenging. We're driving places. And so I think with a lot of the modern technological advances, it's just, we don't have these opportunities to just sort of, sit on the front porch and hang out and
Yeah.
all of a sudden be in this conversation with the neighbors and
Yep.
potlucks and all of those types of things that might have happened a little bit more naturally even 50 years ago.
Yeah. We don't even leave the house. We don't have to leave the house. I can
Right.
order something right now and Amazon will have it in 5 hours. Okay. I live in a town that
Right.
has, an Amazon hub. So I don't have to go anywhere. I can get it 2-day shipping. I don't even do 2 shipping anymore. That's too late. That's too slow
Yes,
for me now.
that's too slow. Yeah. Same here.
I'm like 2 days. I don't want to do that. Where's the one that's coming this afternoon? I can get the $25 unit to get that shipping. And we don't do like a meal prep kits, but I know people who do that. So you don't even have to go to the grocery store anymore. You can do everything from home and actually not need to leave at all. And so that just like you said, those how would we say accidental kind of moments of connection, those incidental moments of connection where you're actually rubbing up against somebody and that sounds really bad. You know what I meant? But like you should just you're just seeing somebody in the grocery store and and you kind of like whatever, just the annoyances that happen when we're around people. Like we think efficiency is going to be the answer to all of it, but we're paying a price through that efficiency.
Yeah. And I think even our young people, right? They've sort of become the loneliest generation. They've surpassed the elderly as the loneliest. And I remember when I used to work in a high school, we went on a mission trip with some students to the Dominican Republic. And so part of the rules was that the students weren't allowed to bring their phones so that we could have a really integrative, connected experience with the people we were helping. And really, they ministered to us more than we ministered to them. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, so after we would do our teaching and mission work in the daytime, we would just hang out in the courtyard of where we were staying. And it was right in the middle of the village and the town that we were serving. And so many of the local children would just come and want to play with our teens. And it was just this really beautiful community-oriented experience. And then we'd have small group discussions with the students after that time. Mm-hmm. And one of the students on their own, unprompted, she just said, this whole experience at the end of the trip, she said, this made me realize that I don't actually know how to have a real conversation. Yes. When I'm with my friends at school, we're sitting together at lunch and we're both on our phones and we're commenting on each other's videos. But us being here really taught me that, this is what a real conversation is. And so that was unprompted. This was without asking a question about having conversations. She just came to that realization on her own. And so I think about that, how we have a whole generation who's growing up in this environment without any previous context of what life was like in years past. And I think about what the impact that could be on people's levels of loneliness and the lack of connection.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the research is clear that it's impacting them. Jean Twenge's research specifically on the impact that social media and smartphones have on kids is not good. It's not good in terms of the amount of hours that somebody spends online is directly correlated with increased rates of anxiety, increased rates of depression. I'm not sure if she specifically loneliness, but those obviously markers are what we're looking for. And we can see that. And so it's important very much for us to be able to set standards and to have some type of restrictions and to be able to teach kids how to talk. Because, Gen Z is developing their own shorthand kind of language and the language is changing rapidly if you hang around a Gen Zer, I don't even know what they're saying half the time. And so it's always.
Yeah, and I'll admit that I'm lost. I don't want to admit it, but I will.
I have a teenager who's in on it, and he always tells me something, and I'll ask him, like, if I hear a term online, he's my reference. I'm always like, all right, bud, like, what does this mean? And half the time he's like, he'll explain it, but half the time he's like, we don't even know what it means. We just kind of go along with it, and we can kind of figure it out in context after the conversation's been going on or the text thread's been going on. We kind of get what it meant, but nobody really knows what it means.
That's hilarious. At least we knew what our words meant. That's so funny.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. And my favorite is when I we'll be in a conversation and then I'll throw out like a Gen Z term in the midst of the conversation, and I get the eye roll, I get the groan, I get the audible. Okay, so like as we're kind of going through this, these obviously kind of contexts or causes. Obviously, we could talk a lot about teenagers and digital connection and the limitations that are there. But let's get into the book a little bit. All right, when you talk about loneliness, how are you characterizing it? What's your working definition? What do you mean? What should be on the lookout when we're saying loneliness, as you understand it?
I think about loneliness as a lack of connection. When we're feeling isolated, disconnected from somebody else, alone in our experience. So you can be in a room full of people, you can be married, you can be in a house full of people, but we all have these moments where we're feeling isolated and alone in our experience and really misunderstood oftentimes. And so that's what I really mean by loneliness, is how it's a rating of how connected we feel and how close and how powerful and strong that bond is between us and another person, whoever that person we might have in mind that we're thinking of at the time.
Yeah. Now, to some degree, that's ubiquitous. I mean, I think there's an element of us that we're all kind of, as we're all within our own heads. There's only so much that we can do. Mm-hmm. At what point and so I think we all have an experience of being in a room and feeling like we're alone and not feeling connected with people. At what point does that become problematic, though?
I think it becomes problematic, especially in the relationship, if we're not communicating that, because I think that there can be resentments that are harbored over time. So, for example, if somebody says something hurtful to you or is disrespectful in some way, sometimes we let it go. It rolls off our back and we move on. Maybe they were having a bad day. We give someone the benefit of the doubt. But other times they sting a little bit more and they're something they carry with us. And at that point, we have a decision to make. Is this something that I can bring up to the other person, right? Especially if it happens multiple times. Mm-hmm. Is this something that I can bring up to the other person and share, what you said, that was really hurtful. I didn't appreciate that. A comment on my clothing or whatever it is. And because if we don't, right, if we hold that, now it's something that becomes in between you and the other person. It creates a barrier for you to feel safe and secure in the relationship. And when we get to that foundation again about our needs to survive, food, shelter, clothing, healthy relationships, now we have that sense of instability of, is this someone that I can trust and rely on? Is this somebody that I feel safe with? And when those relationships start to get disrupted, that it etches away at our overall sense of safety and well-being. And so I think it's really important to pay attention to those moments of, is this something important enough to me that needs to be discussed and brought out into the open so that the relationship can mend, reconcile, and move forward and continue? Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, if you harbor that, right, it's going to create more distance and could eventually rupture the relationship down the line.
Yeah, most certainly. I would think there's a question even kind of connected to that, which is the relationship itself is it important enough for me? Yes. And that, of course, is different. If I'm checking out the cashier at the grocery store and she's having a bad day and kind of makes a snide remark about something, and I feel offended by that, I'm probably more than likely just going to let that one go because it's like, whatever, I'm probably not going to see you again. But that's different than when you're talking about friendship or colleagues that you're in close proximity with, or direct supervisors or some level of that. And of course, the willingness to be vulnerable, to share whatever frustration you have or whatever resentments there is going to be contingent on the ability for the person to receive that, and on the differences of those relationships where you may have a boss that you're having a really difficult time with. I wouldn't encourage anybody to be that vulnerable, if that's something that could threaten your livelihood. But again, when it comes to friendships, when it comes to intimate relationships and with regards to family or loved ones or your spouse or girlfriend, boyfriend, in those places where there's genuine kind of kind of reciprocity that's required in those relationships, and that those are important to you, that those would be the places, without a doubt, where it's worth bringing up whatever obstacles are being present, whatever
Yeah.
impedes the intimacy.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add that if you don't know the person that well and you're noticing these types of comments or hurtful remarks, right, that can be a gauge of, should this be a relationship that I continue, right? Especially in
Mm-hmm.
those early
Mm-hmm.
stages. That's kind of those building blocks to emotional safety, to a lasting relationship. Is this somebody that, again, like you said, is worthy of having the conversation with and opening up and being vulnerable to, or not?
Yeah. Now, early in the book, you make a reference to a story of a woman that I think you were seeing her counseling. I can't remember exactly what it was, but something to the effect that she seemed like she had it all together, was working on some advanced degree, yeah, dated sufficiently, had friendships, but she was still feeling this sense of loneliness. And what you kind of, I guess, pointed to is that it wasn't. It seemed like the error was kind of on her fear of making those connections. That there was a lack of investment on her side, in terms of making commitments and growing deeper. And I know you kind of mentioned a couple other stories that were similar in that regard throughout the book. That it could be that maybe we have the value for this. We want intimacy. We want connection. Maybe it's on their side that we've been hurt, but maybe it's also on our side that maybe we don't want to put the investment or the energy that's actually going to be required to make the relationship work.
It's so hard. It's so hard. Um, it really is, because it's kind of this catch-22 of,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
darned if you do and darned if you don't, right?
absolutely.
Because if we open up, we risk somebody not receiving it well, that they can,
Mm-hmm.
again, say something hurtful, make fun of you. They could share what you share to other people, and maybe you wanted to keep it private, right? So they could be hurtful in some way with that information. But at the same time, if we don't risk a little bit, we don't have the opportunity to grow closer and to take that relationship to a deeper level. And so it's just, you're kind of stuck in this place of gauging, again, is this somebody who's showing me that they're somebody that's kind of worth taking the risk with? Have they established that they're a safe enough person to do that in the right context? And hopefully there's some reciprocal sharing, progressive, as you continue the relationship, right? But we can't get to those deeper levels unless we're willing to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
really requires a huge amount of vulnerability, of just putting ourselves out there in all kinds of ways.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard, we recently moved to a new area, and making friends has been good. We're grateful that the church community that we're part of, has been very hospitable and welcoming to us. And even through my son's high school and the homeschool groups that we've been able to really develop some friendships. But even still, it's kind of it's awkward. You're meeting people for the first time, and Chris and I it's like it's gonna sound weird, but like dating friends. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
you're like, well, they were kind of normal. That was nice. Did we have a good conversation? Let's kind of process after the fact. How was the wife? How was the husband? Did you feel like are they somebody we would want to invite over for dinner? Like, are we ready to take that next step in like a friendship and bringing people over and going out for coffee with them? Or would we be willing to go like a double date? Or, I mean, we just don't know. Like, where are we? And like that kind of dance that we play, it can be really awkward.
It's incredibly awkward. Yeah. And almost feeling like, right, you have to put on a little bit of your best foot forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're amenable. The other person's trying to show you they're amenable. And
Yep.
I think that's the beautiful part of it too, though, is I think it's a universal experience. We all really feel that way of, how do I feel about this person? But I hope they accept me as well.
Yeah.
And so hopefully that gives us reassurance, right? That everyone's kind of thinking the same thing anyway.
Yep. You kind of hope so. Yeah. I just had an experience where I sent an email to somebody who I thought I had a good read on, and did not. And I was like, oh man, I totally missed that,
Oh, man.
And all week I've been like, man, I'm kind of bummed out about that. I feel like,
Yeah.
it's like,
That's so hard.
it's like, oh, I thought we were going to be friends, but I guess not.
Oh.
Let's kind of think just a second here as I'm thinking, obviously I'm in my kind of dating kind of mindset because I do a lot with Dating Well and starting kind of to do some coaching for dating as well. In that context specifically, I know this is different than just kind of general friendships, but the thing that you said earlier about knowing when somebody's kind of trustworthy enough in a dating relationship, what does that look like? How do you know when you're kind of ready? You got a couple dates, maybe you've had some great chats online and through the app or whatever you're meeting, where you kind of keep running into each other at the same kind of functions. And how can you begin to measure that sense of trustworthiness that you can feel safe enough to engage and go forward in a relationship with them?
You really want to gauge how they respond to you when you open up about something. So if you're opening up about something small, maybe previous jobs that you've had or something like that, sharing a story about a job that's of low consequence to you, right? How they respond to that. Are they receptive? Are they kind? Do they seem open and, again, amiable to what you're sharing? Or do they make some type of sarcastic remark that you don't really appreciate? Right. So these are all little ways to gauge of, is this somebody who I can trust maybe a more important story with? At some point, you're going to have to take the risk anyway. There's no way we're never going to know for sure, 100%. And that's part of how relationships develop, is this dance. I think about, elementary school kids on the playground or middle school kids, as you get to know each other and become, girls with friendship bracelets and doing hopscotch, right? And there's sort of this dance that happens where it's this beginning to share a little bit more about, oh, my parents are getting divorced, or, oh, my brother got in trouble, or whatever. And all of a sudden, they're doing hopscotch every day and have friendship bracelets because they shared something about each other, right? And they feel like they know everything about the other person. Yeah. Eventually you're going to have to take the risk, and then you'll have a lot of information after that risk about how they responded and if that's something you want to continue.
Yeah. Middle school boys aren't sharing friendship bracelets with one another.
Yes, that's true. They're playing a game. We're
playing a game, exactly. We're competing with each other, which is a way that we develop, relationships. The scenario that I brought up just a second ago with dating, what you said is absolutely right, and I agree with it in terms of just taking little steps, low-hanging fruit, things that you can share that is really of little consequence, like you said, talking about your past or some job or something that isn't super vulnerable, but at least begins to get a sense of how they would respond to that type of more personal information. Is certainly one marker. The other marker that I would throw out there, just for the sake of kind of this conversation, is that if somebody, how do they talk about their past relationships? If they are speaking about previous relationships in a very negative light, girls that they've dated, if we're talking about a guy or guys they've dated, if we're talking about girls, there's a way that they've talked about their previous relationships. Even in kind of those first couple of dates, if you kind of get the sense that there's a lot of animosity on those things, that's just a little flag, they just kind of want to be attentive to, because you don't know if genuinely that the other person is bad, or it could be that their interpretation of events, of course, are being one-sided there. Hey everybody, this is Dr. Mario. I'm taking a quick break from my conversation with Regina Boyd to encourage you to check us out at faithandmarriage.org. Let's say this conversation about loneliness is really provoking something inside of you and you really want to get some answers. Well, if you are married, then the thing that we could recommend the best is for you to attend one of our upcoming retreats, where it would be an opportunity for you and your spouse to reconnect. But let's say you're single and you're struggling within the dating market and you don't quite know how to be able to take the next steps in dating, then I encourage you to check out my Dating Well program. Both of those are going to be ways that are going to help you to restart and reconnect depending on what state of life that you're in. If you're single and looking for some resources, again, check out Dating Well. If you're married and come and join us on one of our upcoming marriage retreats, you can find links to all of those at faithandmarriage.org. So when it comes to then building connection, right? That's going to be the antidote here. That's the answer to loneliness, is building connection, and that's really where the book kind of is in its lane, is trying to give as many strategies as possible, many gateways for us to be able to develop and build those connections. One of the examples that you give, or one of the tips that you offer, is roadmaps for the relationship. So what is a roadmap, and why is that important?
Yeah, I took the roadmap concept from Dr. John Gottman, and it's really about how well do I know the other person. So when you think about those old school paper maps where we had all the details in there about elevation levels and landscapes and miles versus kilometers. And so we had a way of reading the map and helping us navigate how to get around and get to our destination. And so if you think about how well you know another person, it's a little bit about that map. How well do you know their inner world, their likes and dislikes, favorite formal restaurant, informal restaurant? Who are they currently having drama with at work? Do they have an arch enemy at work, right? And how much do you know about that, right? What are their current dreams and stressors? And so the more detail we can add to those maps really has something to say about how well we know the other person and how that foundation for connection really. So we kind of want to aim for that Google Maps level view of somebody where we're just constantly circling back. Couples are a great example for this because oftentimes in those new stages of dating or even engagement, couples are usually really strong on their roadmaps. Yeah. They know so much about each other. They are like sponges. They can't absorb enough. They just constantly want to know everything, right? Tell me everything about you. But a lot of times, not with every couple, but oftentimes over the years, we sort of couples can fall into having a really detailed paper map of those initial early years or when we first got married. 10 years into marriage, they're still operating off of that old map.
Yeah.
And they haven't made any Google Maps updates to what could have changed over the last 10 years. So they might not be aware that the favorite restaurant has changed. They might not be aware that there's a new situation happening at work or there's this opportunity for a promotion that's been on their mind. So it's really important to make sure that we're always on the lookout and asking those questions about what's happening in someone's life and remembering the answer to them so that we can stay connected, stay up to date, so to speak, in that sense. And that's where that's why couples often end up in therapy, is because those roadmaps have really fallen apart.
Yeah. I don't think I shared this story or have shared this story on the podcast yet, but my in-laws, this was a couple years ago, we were at their house in Tallahassee, and they had a barbecue, and my father-in-law was grilling burgers out on the grill, and we're having just a wonderful day, together. And so after he's finished grilling the burgers, he puts them on the plate, brings them inside, cleans the grill, comes inside and sits, and my mother-in-law takes the plate, and she's graciously, fixing his burger for him. And so she puts it on the bun and puts a little mayonnaise, a little bit of ketchup on the bun, and puts it in front of him. And my father-in-law looks at the burger and says, "Patty, I don't like ketchup on my burgers." Patty goes, "Bill, we've been married for 35 years, and this is the first time you've ever told me that you don't like ketchup on your burgers. Why?" And he said, "Well, I was just always grateful that you would make it for me. And so I never wanted to say anything because I never wanted to offend you. I was always grateful that you would do it. But I don't know, just felt like today's the day to say that I don't."
I'm sick of this ketchup. Can't take it anymore.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I'm seeing this thing unfold, and I'm just laughing. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is classic. This is so great. It may seem insignificant, and it really is. I mean, we're talking about ketchup. It's not a big deal, but it's those little things. That's all part of this roadmap that you're speaking about. It's all part of how do we really know the intricacies of this person? What really are this person's flavors and desires and interests? And of course, we're going to know that to a certain degree when it comes to our spouses. But even with friendships, again, do we still know the roadmap and still know who they are? And are we taking time to be invested in them? And we think about like the 5 love languages, for example, here, this is something that comes up, like what is their love language? The one that seems to get like the most kind of a rap, as I've heard, or the one that maybe people are the least inclined to share as their love language is gifts, because it seems like it comes across as being like vain. This is what somebody told me. And it's like, wow, you admitted that you material. I'm like, yeah, gifts is one of mine. They're like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just what it is. But like, I don't know what to say. But my one of my sons specifically is a really good gift giver. And the reason he's a really good gift giver is because of this, because he's able to pay attention to his friendships. And he knows by being in relationship with them what their needs are and what their interests are. And so he can come up with really great ideas that are just superb gifts that are so unique to the individual. It's really a talent that he has, you know. So whenever we need to get gifts for the cousins, we're always like, "Hey, man, what do you think?" Because we're ready just to get the $15 Amazon gift card. But obviously you can come up with something better for us. So tell us what you think. And he's really good at that. Really, it really is one of his gifts. Is with regards to friendships and being able to find those intricacies and being able to give gifts to somebody. And so I think that's an important aspect of this, is when you know what their needs are, then you can respond to that. So if you're talking about kind of knowing their favorite restaurants or their favorite ice cream, knowing those things so that when you're having those tough days that you could take the initiative and say, hey, why don't we go get whatever? Let's go to this place. You know, I got this already squared up for us, because you kind of know what's going to fill their cup. But as you indicated, those conversations need to be had on a regular basis, because our interests change, our tastes change, the things that we're introduced to change, our desires change, all that stuff kind of evolves, which is why for couples it's really important to have regular date nights as a way of being able to maintain those moments of connection and those moments of conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. I often joke about Dan and I, when we first met, I was not a big red meat eater. I was just chicken and fish. And over the years, you know, I'd start smelling those hamburgers he was eating. And I'm like, you know, that maybe just try a little bite, you know. And and now I'm very much a red meat eater. But could you imagine if he like didn't know that about me or something, or still thought that I was, you know, only eating chicken and fish? Yeah. And that would be a huge oversight, right? Of how people change over the years.
Absolutely. I've been trying to get my wife onto the red meat side for 20 years and it hasn't worked. So
That's so
she's
funny.
still a chicken and fish girl.
Yeah.
Trying. Okay, so just continuing on with the sense of what builds connection is then also this notion of expressing gratitude to one another, and that's important, that when we see that somebody has taken an effort to be able to express that, and I love that you quote the line that's often used at airports. You know, if you see something, say something, is what you say in the book. What do you mean by that?
A lot of times we see things that we appreciate from somebody and we just think it to ourselves. We think, oh, that was so nice. But it's really about making sure we go that extra effort to acknowledge it and say, wow, I really appreciate, thank you so much for that thoughtful gift that you gave, or thank you for remembering me on my birthday. It really made me feel special. And so all of those, when we express gratitude, again, we're kind of like watering the soil, fertilizing the soil of your relationship and just making it richer and more impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, I mean...
I think... Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
With the challenge with like spouses and even with friendships is that we can take each other for granted. And it's when we take each other for granted, when we assume that they are just going to be there, that's when a lack of gratitude kind of emerges. And it's not even necessarily that it's a disdain or a bitterness towards them. It can foster into that, but it's just kind of this, you know, like I just forgot to say thank you. You know, I just assumed that you would be taking care of your side of the lists when it comes to kind of household responsibilities, where I just assumed that you would do whatever it is that you're doing. And forgetting that there's always a decision that's being made, and that decision must always be met with a sense of gratitude. to acknowledge that, wow, thank you, for the ways that you take care of our family unit, the ways that you provide, the ways that you serve, the ways that you take care of us. Always being able to express that and being able to see how the other person is providing value to the unit, and expressing that gratitude. Because I think we all want to know that. We all want to feel like, man, like somebody's noticing what I just did there, and I really want people to express that gratitude, for that.
Yeah, it makes me, as you're kind of talking, I'm being reminded of the Trinity, right? So we believe in a God who exists in relationship
Mm-hmm.
eternally, Father, Son, and Spirit, and this constant exchange of love, right? And so when I think about expressing gratitude, if we're made in that image and likeness of God, in a way, we're kind of uniquely reflecting that when we have those exchanges of really love through that expression of gratitude for another person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we live our relationships well, when we're bonded in that way, it's really us being more in the image of what we're created to be in the first place.
Yep. Yep. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so that requires, of course, a donative gift of self, and the ability to be able to say, all right, I'm willing to take that risk, and being to give of myself. And it's the act of self-gift that allows me to be able to grow in self-knowledge also. And so it's not that it's lost, it's like the more I know about myself, the more I can give about myself, the more I give of myself, the more I learn about myself. And they do feed
Yeah.
on each other, this notion of gift. And so it isn't that we do these things just altruistically all the time, but it is the sense that it's like, okay, I'm giving, I'm learning, I want to develop into the best version of myself, and as I develop into that, as we've been saying, relationship is a key element of that. And so the more that I'm able to fine tune and understand myself, the more that I can act accordingly. And I think that even comes into, you mentioned it throughout the book at times, that one of the other kind of limitations, I guess, of connection is really our past and our experiences and the ways that we've been hurt by previous relationships. And are you a fan of, have you like a polyvagal theory? Are you familiar with this? Have you heard about this? This is kind of new in kind of the counseling world here.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of it. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in it by any means, but yes, I've heard of it.
I'm not an expert either, but I had a deep
Yes.
dive last year when I was doing my continuing education credits for the various states that I'm licensed in. I was like, I'm going to buy a couple PESI courses,
Nice.
related to polyvagal. I was like, I really kind of want to learn this theory and at least understand it. And I started listening to podcasts by Stephen Porges and Deb Dana, and it's awesome. It's so, I just love it. I love it. And what it really posits is, and the reason I love it so much is because often I've heard, and I know you say the word wounds in the book, and I know that's a word that's kind of used in terms of how to conceptualize our past, and you don't do this in the book, so this isn't an indictment of that, but just in general, the wounds language, like I don't know, something about it, kind of the way it's been used in kind of popular Catholic kind of circles. I don't, and that's an episode. That's a whole nother episode. Sometimes I just feel like it's like, are we all this broken? We're not all this broken. Like it's not, we're not all this wounded. Like let's get out from our stuff and get on with our life, type of thing. Like absolutely, there's
Right.
trauma, and that's a different level of kind of experience. But I don't think we're all kind of just these broken selves. And so the reason I bring that up is because what I love about polyvagal theory is that they don't like look at this in any sort of negative. Rather, they say, and you say this in the book also, it's rather, we've just developed our nervous systems have developed these adaptive strategies. We are built for survival, and we are built for connection, and we're built for being attuned and aware of threats to our safety and to our well-being. And the way that we attune this neuroception is one of the words that's used in polyvagal theory, that it's not just we perceive things, but even beyond the level of cognition, at a deeper level, it's like our body just kind of recognizes threats in an environment. And that sensitivity to that, our nervous system, the way it picks up those threats is of course genetic, but then of course absolutely we is environmental. And so we do have neuroplasticity, and our brains kind of become aware of certain things. And so if I step into a room and you step into the same room, the things that are going to be threats for you are going to be different than the things that are going to be threats for me. If we're in a
Right.
conversation with the same person, the things that that person says might trigger me differently than the way they're going to trigger you because of your experience versus my experience. And so, absolutely our past, it affects this. But I just love the fact that they say it's an adaptive strategy. So rather than looking at it as just we're all broken, it's rather no, it's your body doing what it needs to do. And so it's just a
Mhm.
strategy, it's just a mechanism that's been developed, and that mechanism was developed in a particular environment. And so now what we need to do is we just need to retrain that mechanism to be able to adapt to the new environment that it's in. And when we get stuck in those previous environments, for whatever reason, that's where the hiccup is. And so we need to be able to kind of develop new strategies, new adaptive strategies, but that they're adaptive. Again, that means that they can change, that we can learn new ways of being able to connect and to relate to people. But does require a certain degree of awareness, but then also a degree of being willing to make changes to those behaviors and to those perceptions, so that we can grow in greater attunement, for future relationships.
Yeah, I love it so much. It's so true, when I think about I give this example a lot of times, but if a child were to grow up in some type of abusive home where the
Right.
parents were
Right.
violent towards each other, that 5-year-old child who goes and hides in the closet to survive, that's a very smart 5-year-old child,
Yes,
right? They
that's exactly
removed
right.
themselves
Yes.
from
Yes.
the situation
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
and they did the best they had available to them at that time, right? They're not old enough to drive anywhere. They can't go buy themselves a new house. So that child made a very good decision. But a lot of times when that child grows up and starts getting into relationships with people and there's an argument, right? They're triggered
Right.
and they sort of do this emotional hiding in the closet, right? Rather than dealing with the issue and getting in there and resolving it, which can cause a problem in that friendship, marriage, whatever it is.
Hmm.
And so I really, to what you're saying, right, is learning what that is for each one of us and how do we use that survival skill that was effective and how do we adapt it to the present circumstance and realize that we're no longer that 5-year-old child. We're in a completely different environment and that helped you get to where you are today. It was a valuable skill, but how can we now use that to navigate these relationships?
Because life is changing, and yeah,
Yeah.
we all have our own perspective, and we all have we bring ourselves wherever we go, as they say. And it is that I love that you said that the 5-year-old made a very smart decision to run into the closet.
Yeah.
Like that's what felt safe, and so kudos for them.
Hmm.
Like you said, the problem is if that's the only way that they've learned how to relate, then it becomes, all right, how do we start getting out of that closet? How do we start learning how to be engaged in emotionally challenging situations, not feeling like we have to run? Now, some of that
Right.
also is, of course, a fight or flight response, the sympathetic response, and we're all wired one way or the other. Some of us are wired more towards the fighting. Some of us are wired more towards the flight. And so we kind of pay attention to whatever our disposition is to be able to work against that a little bit so that we can move again towards that place of connection. Polyvagal theory, again, not being an expert in it, but the little bit that I know kind of says that there's basically like 3 levels of responses to stress. And the oldest level, evolutionarily speaking, is what's called the dorsal vagal response. And that's the shutdown. That's
Mm.
the animals that bury their head in the sand or pass out, the possums that pass out, to play dead, because that was a smart tactic. If a predator was coming for you, play dead, because unless they are, what's the word, like a vulture, what is that? Somebody who eats that eats like dead
Oh, right.
animals. What's that? I
Yeah,
forget that.
vulture.
Yeah, I forget
Yeah.
what that class of animal is called that eats kind of
Oh, right.
carcasses and stuff like that. Unless it's that type of animal, like playing dead was very smart because it means that they would leave you alone and they wouldn't harm you. But at some point, again, and I recognize this is just through the science. So I'm using the scientific language, and in my stance, of course, when I say this with evolution, of course, God guides us. God guided the whole process, right? So the next level to be developed in the nervous system was the sympathetic response, which is to say that the fight or flight response is actually significant. It's a significant jump in self-defense. where instead of just playing dead, now what we get to do is we actually have this increase in cortisol, this increase in adrenaline, this increase in endorphins that we need, and hormones that we need to be able to fight off this predator or to get the heck out, get out as fast as possible. And that response is very adaptive. And then the last response to have developed is this sense of connection, which is found in the ventral vagal nerve. And so in the ventral vagal nerve is where we find that place of calm, of connection. And that is the best version of what we can do with stress. And so like what this does again is posits kind of things in a more positive spin, which is to say that even the fight or flight response, which gets a bad rap, it's adaptive. It's not, there's nothing wrong with it. What's wrong is that at times that we misconstrue things as threats. And so what we're learning is how to retune our nervous systems to not look at everything as a threat. And so the examples that you give in the book are wonderful in the sense of building those connections, identifying what the triggers are, being able to do a little bit of work and to say, okay, well, like, do I really need to be this 5-year-old running back into the closet again? Can I look at the circumstance as an adult? Do I have to feel this helpless? Can I engage in this moment? Can I find security in other relationships, and through that security allow me to then be able to manage risks and challenges and anxieties in the world as a whole? Can I pay attention to what things are activating my cortisol and be able then to say, well, do I really need that? Social media, news, cough, cough, hint, hint. Manage the things that you can manage, people. Like, turn off the news. If every time you get off the app, you just feel angry and ticked off, and you feel that your cortisol levels are being raised, like, manage what you actually can and stay focused on what's good. But that there's this kind of, going back to polyvagal theory, that there's these levels that kind of exist, and that they're all adaptive. They're all part of who we are. It's just learning how to be able to navigate out of one into the other, and then trying to get to the healthiest response, or the best response that we have now, which is finding that sense of connection, which is all very much attachment, of course.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. I love the way they're framing that, and it makes perfect sense, because it's true. I mean, it's really, when you speak about it, I think there's a lot there that anyone can identify with, right, and recognize themselves in that as well.
Yeah. All right. So connection then. All right. The last thing here is just, what about boundaries? Like, we can't have connection or intimacy with everybody. And there are some people that have really hurt us, and it just wouldn't be smart, to be open and vulnerable with them if that's the case. So where do boundaries play a role in connection, and how do healthy boundaries help us actually to overcome loneliness?
Great question. So boundaries are really about, again, how do I have this relationship in a healthy way, in an appropriate way? So if I'm that 5-year-old growing up in that abusive household, I might not be coming home every year for Thanksgiving once I'm an adult and, kumbayaing it with my parents if they haven't learned by that point to, get that under control or some level, because that's not safe for me to be in that environment mentally, emotionally, and possibly physically. So and that's an extreme example, but
Sure.
Sometimes we need the extreme examples to illustrate, right? If there's a place where I don't have the mental, emotional bandwidth to be in somebody's presence, then that's okay for a time to have those boundaries and really set up a situation of, when can I spend time with you? When would be a good context versus not? So maybe I can't stay with you for several days over Thanksgiving, but I'm happy to meet you for lunch, in a coffee shop somewhere, have a cup of coffee, and then we're on our way. And so there's lots of degrees of how can I engage in connection with someone, again, versus not. And I also really believe that boundaries can be an opportunity to affirm the dignity of the other person. We often think of it as cutting somebody off and saying, you're too much, you have a problem, I'm putting up this boundary with you. but it's really also calling someone to a higher level, to be better, to say, I believe in you, right? I know you're capable of this, and here's how interacting with me is gonna go, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And we can say that in a very kind, respectful, charitable way, but I know that you're capable of this, and this is why I'm asking this of you. This is what I really need in this relationship, and it's also honoring yourself and your dignity by being clear about your own needs and desires for the relationship. It's just really creating this opportunity for reconciliation, for closeness, when we're clear and honest about what we need, whether it's, are you a morning person? Are you a night person? I need more introvert time, extrovert time, right? If we know this about in our friendships, if I'm an extrovert and my friend's an introvert and I'm inviting them to this street party to come tag along with me, right? I need to be aware of the sacrifice that they're making, right? And be okay when the next time I make the invite, they decline and say, well, I've had a lot going on this week, and not taking that personally. So I think it's a great way to know more about another person and how to meet them where they're at.
What about for the person who's listening that struggles with codependency and says, yeah, that's great and all, but I just need to continue to pursue, selfless, just give, because that's what Jesus said to do.
Yes, Jesus did say to do that. You are 100% correct. But Jesus himself also took breaks. He took time to retreat away from his disciples, from the crowds, to pray, and because he did that, he was able to serve and come down with a more powerful message, from the Lord, and really do the healing and all of his works and wonders. And so you would want to spend some time reflecting on what is it in you that really wants to go after that person, right? Is it fear of abandonment or whatever it is? And having some thought and some reflection around, am I reacting out of a place of freedom and openness? Again, do I feel safety in this relationship that I can just be without having to act or grasp or do? Or am I doing this action because they might leave me if I don't? And then is that really the type of relationship we want to have anyway? So we always want to be thinking about how can we, again, be aiming for a healthier, more whole relationship.
That's it. You got it. Exactly. It's because we can misconstrue any aspect of the Bible, and sometimes what people are looking for, or maybe sometimes what the Lord is asking of us, is actually to develop a little bit more self-confidence. And maybe those moments it's part of our own formation, it's part of our own growth, is to be able to set those boundaries and to be able to stand up for ourselves as part of what the Lord actually wants for our own personal well-being and growth and development. So, it's hard navigating all that. I get it. I understand it. But it's important for us to be able to have those firm boundaries inside of us, so that we can have healthy relationships. As a friend of mine likes to say, good fences make for good neighbors. That it's like when we kind of know where we stand and kind of where the lines are, we can interact, and that's the way that it is, and that's important. We see that even when it comes to kind of when people are kind of dating a little bit and they're kind of in that ambiguity stage, there's always the DTR conversation. It's the, well, what are we doing? Let's define the relationship now. Like what's going on? All of those are part of ways of being able to set boundaries, and that those boundaries are important. And of course, we always want to measure, are we being too rigid, or are we being too permeable with them? But when we can kind of understand what it is that works for us in the context of this relationship, because that permeability or that rigidity is going to change. Of course, it's going to be relationship dependent, but being able to then say, like, it's important for me to be able to have this boundaries so that I can maintain a sense of safety, and that I can maintain a sense of relationship also with the person. So, Regina, this has been wonderful. I thank you so much for the time that you've given to me and the audience today. If people are interested in getting the book, how can they do so?
They can find the book at avemariapress.com or on Amazon.
Yeah, wonderful. All right. Well, if they enjoyed listening to you, anything else you'd like to plug?
Sure. Yeah. I have a website, reginaboyd.com, but if you want to pursue any type of therapy, especially anyone wanting to develop boundaries, codependency, right? All those things we talked about. You can go there, reginaboyd.com, or just find me on Instagram at Boyd Counseling Services.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you'll get some great content on her handle as well. Well, Regina, I think I asked you this last time. I can't remember, but I'll ask it anyways. First question I ask all my guests: what gives you hope?
Oh my goodness. There are so many good people in the world. I was at a conference recently and just thinking about all the people that went into place to bring thousands of people together, thousands of speakers, vendors. And I was just really in awe of how many people are just out there doing the Lord's work and making things happen in all these different ministries, capacities. So that gives me a lot of hope, just knowing how many good people there are in the world doing good things.
Praise the Lord. Great stuff. All right. Well, many blessings to you and your family and your outreach and work and ministry and everything you got going on. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Well, that does it for my conversation with Regina. Please check out her book. Links are in the show notes. I think that you will enjoy it. As I read the book, I found it to be very gentle, and I felt like I was actually in a therapy session with her. She does a wonderful job of being able to capture kind of therapy, soothing presence as an author. And as I was going through the book, I really felt like I was just one of her clients, and she was taking me by the hand and walking me through this whole experience of loneliness and how to be able to overcome it. So leave a rating, write a review on Apple Podcasts. Again, I say it at every episode because I mean it. They absolutely help. And so if you've enjoyed this episode, or leave a rating, write a review, or simply just share it with somebody that you know who will benefit from it as well. Well, God bless you all, and we'll catch you on the next one.